Chapter 1. The Apartment Next Door. The wind carried a chill through the streets of Chicago, marking the start of autumn with a kind of Christmas that always made Nora feel alive. She loved this season, the way it seemed to clear away the summer's humidity and bring a fresh, golden edge to the city. It was on one of these cold, blustery evenings that she first heard the music. Nora had lived in her old brownstone apartment for nearly 5 years, nestled comfortably in a neighborhood that had long since become part of her routine. She liked the quiet of it, the familiarity of the buildings that lined the street, their histories written into the cracks in their brick facades. The people who lived in the building were mostly longtime residents, like her. So when she came home one evening to the sound of the soft, unfamiliar piano melody drifting through the wall of her living room, it was something of a surprise. She paused, her coat still draped over her arm as she stood in the entryway, listening. The music was slow, tentative, as if the player was unsure of themselves, yet it stirred something deep within her. The melody was both haunting and beautiful, though a little rough around the edges. Someone was either learning or had returned to the instrument after years of neglect. Intrigued, she stepped closer to the wall, her ear nearly pressed against it. It was coming from the apartment directly beside hers, where Mrs. Haley, her elderly neighbor, had lived for as long as Nora could remember. But Mrs. Haley had passed away 3 months ago, and Nora hadn't noticed anyone moving in since then. She stood there, enveloped in the quiet of her apartment, the music the only thing filling the space between her and whoever was on the other side of that wall. It wasn't long before the melody came to a stop, followed by a few seconds of silence, then the familiar sound of a chair being pushed back and footsteps retreating. Nora stared at the wall for a moment longer, wondering about this new neighbor who had moved in without her noticing. Chapter 2. The Musician. The next evening, the music returned, but this time it was different. The notes flowed more freely, as if the player was gaining confidence. Nora, curious by nature, found herself drawn to it again. She wondered what kind of person played the piano like that, so raw, so unpolished, yet full of passion. On a whim, she decided to bake some brownies. It was a silly excuse, really, but she wanted to meet this mysterious musician. After all, it had been 3 months since Mrs. Haley's passing, and she hadn't even seen anyone move in. With the tray of brownies cooling in her kitchen, she slipped into a light jacket and stood outside the apartment next door. Nora hesitated for a moment, second-guessing herself, but then knocked softly. A few seconds passed before the door opened, and a man appeared. He was tall, with dark brown hair that fell in messy waves just above his eyes, and a face that looked as though it belonged in some vintage black-and-white photograph. He had the kind of quiet, brooding look that made him seem both mysterious and approachable at the same time. "Hi," Nora said, suddenly feeling a bit self-conscious. "I'm Nora, your next-door neighbor. I made these brownies and thought I'd bring them over as a kind of welcome." The man blinked, surprised, then a warm smile spread across his face. "Oh, thanks, I'm Owen," he said, holding out his hand. "I just moved in a couple of weeks ago." "Nice to meet you," Nora replied, handing him the tray. "I couldn't help but notice the music. Are you a pianist?" Owen laughed softly. "Not exactly. I'm more of a beginner who's trying to learn again. It's been a while since I played." "Well, it sounds great from where I'm sitting," she said, her smile genuine. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, Nora felt an unexpected flutter in her chest. "Thanks. I'm still a bit rusty, but I'm working on it." Chapter 3. The Late-Night Concerts. After that, Owen and Nora started talking more. It began with casual greetings in the hallway, then evolved into longer conversations over coffee on Saturday mornings. Sometimes even dinners at one another's apartments. Their friendship grew naturally, as if they had known each other for years instead of just weeks. Nora learned that Owen had recently moved back to Chicago after a long stint in Seattle, where he'd worked as a graphic designer. He had grown tired of the rain and the isolation and decided to reconnect with his roots in the Midwest. Playing piano, he confessed, was something he'd left behind during his teenage years. The instrument had once been his escape, but life, as it often does, got in the way. At night, the music continued. Nora would sit in her apartment, her workday behind her, and listen to Owen play through the thin walls that separated their lives. His melodies became more fluid, more confident as the weeks went by. The music, once hesitant, now filled her evenings with a kind of warmth she hadn't realized she was missing. One particularly cold December evening, Owen knocked on her door, a sheepish grin on his face. "Can I borrow your company tonight?" he asked, his hands tucked into his coat pockets. "I've been working on a new piece, and I could use some feedback." Nora, flattered and curious, agreed. She followed him into his apartment, where the soft glow of a single lamp illuminated the small, upright piano tucked into the corner of his living room. "Sit," Owen said, gesturing to the couch. He sat at the piano and took a deep breath, his fingers hovering over the keys for a moment before they began to move. The melody was unlike anything she had heard him play before. It was rich, full of emotion, like a conversation between the past and the present. She felt as though Owen was telling a story without words, speaking through the music. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. When the final note faded into silence, Owen turned to her, his eyes searching hers for a reaction. Nora, at a loss for words, simply smiled. Chapter 4. Unspoken Feelings. Winter deepened, and the city streets became coated in layers of snow. As Christmas approached, Nora and Owen's friendship grew stronger, yet there was something unspoken between them, a feeling that simmered beneath the surface of every conversation, every shared glance. Nora couldn't deny that she was falling for him. It was in the way he smiled at her, the way he seemed to understand her without needing explanations. It was in the music he played late at night, a soundtrack to the quiet connection they had built. On New Year's Eve, they found themselves on Nora's balcony, wrapped in blankets and sipping hot chocolate as fireworks lit up the Chicago skyline. The air was crisp, the kind that made every breath feel sharper, more present. "So, what's your resolution this year?" Nora asked, her voice soft, barely audible over the distant sounds of celebration. Owen was quiet for a moment, staring out at the lights reflecting off the snow. "To take more chances," he said finally, turning to face her. Nora's heart raced as his gaze lingered on her. Before she could respond, Owen leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a soft, tentative kiss. The kiss was everything years of unspoken feelings, late-night music, shared moments. It was the answer to the question neither of them had dared to ask aloud. When they finally pulled apart, Nora smiled. "I think that's a pretty good start," she whispered. Epilogue, a new melody. Spring came, and with it, a new rhythm to Nora and Owen's lives. They had started something neither of them had planned for, but that neither could deny. Owen's piano playing had become more confident, more certain, much like their relationship. Every night, a new melody filled their shared space, a symphony of laughter, conversation, and love. It was no longer just Owen's music that Nora listened to through the walls. It was the symphony of two lives blending into one, each note building on the last, creating something new and beautiful together. And in the end, that was all that mattered.